So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first session in Mahayana Mind Training, Wheel of Sharp Weapons. So let's get started with just doing a few prayers. I'll put some prayers on the screen for us to recite together. So I think tonight we'll do all of these. There's some nights when maybe we'll just cut this a little bit short. The first prayer we might not do 3 times, but tonight let's recite it 3 times. This is where we're thinking about the Buddha and all of his amazing qualities and paying homage to the Buddha within the recognition that we ourselves and all beings can become just like the Buddha, perfect in all the ways that are described here. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. So I think most of you are familiar with the short mandala offering. As we recite this, we can visualize the entire phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful Buddha paradise, kind of an ultimate pure land where ourselves and all beings can eventually attain that same state. This is the reason why we're doing this, making this vast pure offering so that we and others can accomplish the path to enlightenment quickly, especially through the teachings that we're receiving in regard to this precious text. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge and bodhicitta, bringing these 2 thoughts to mind. And then, of course, we'll do a short meditation on bodhicitta as well in a moment. But we'll recite this in English first, so we can bring the meaning of the English words into our heart. And then we'll do it twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened. To the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, by the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi, daki chanyen ki pe sanam ki, dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi, daki jinso chunyen kipe sonam ki, dola penchir sangye drupar sho. All right, let's do a short reflection meditation in order to come into this space and calm the mind a bit from whatever our days were like. No doubt some of you had very busy days filled with many things, and so it's good to spend a little time just focusing the mind. So again, just use the breath in whatever way is suitable for your own mind. to try to calm the mind, focusing on the breath. And then I'll come in just a few minutes and lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation. So now let's set our motivation for this evening's class. And let's do this by, first of all, recalling the preciousness of this life. Every one of us has this time because of the causes we created in the past that have given us this opportunity to be able to use this human life with the human intellect that we possess to explore the Buddha's teachings. And just take a moment to really rejoice and again, just the value of this time that we have together. The fact that each of us is here wanting to partake of the Dharma, wanting to work on our own minds through the teachings on Lojong, mind training, and just feel some joy at that. Just really relishing the fact that we're all here. Get the sea of sentient beings out there, not just the humans, but all of the animals of this world as well. And then, of course, all the beings in the various realms that the Buddha taught, countless infinite beings. We recognize that most of them don't have, first of all, the opportunity that we now possess in this human life. Most of them are not interested in the Dharma, even if they have a human existence. It is kind of our responsibility and our job as beings who have met with the Buddha Dharma to do what we can to increase our own qualities so we can then help others to find this precious jewel of Buddha Dharma. to then be able to help them, instruct them, to lead them on the path, so they too can find the happiness and peace that they seek. So generate that motivation of bodhicitta that is intent on helping all sentient beings. Recognizing that in order to do this, we have to become enlightened ourselves. Therefore, we're going to engage in this set of teachings on Mahayana mind training, helping us to use everything we meet as a door to awakening, realizing our full potential, so we can help others to do the same. Hey, again, very happy to be here with you to start this text tonight, and especially want to give a shout out to Bill and Colleen for organizing this, and all my dear friends, of course, in Missoula and elsewhere, who I'm glad to reconnect with all of you for these teachings. So what I'd like to do with tonight's going to be relatively introductory, but I want to begin with a short presentation on the FPMT basic program. Some of you may have heard some of this information before, but if you haven't, I think it's really good to understand that we are offering this course as a way to begin, if you haven't started yet, or to continue your kind of getting some of the courses in what's called the FPMT basic program completed. There is a completion certificate if you do go through all of the subjects and so on. But I want to give you some information on that. It won't take but a few minutes. And it's just useful so that you understand kind of the context of where these teachings are being offered. Let's see, let me get my slideshow up. And all right, so in terms of, whoops, let me go to the beginning. I thought I had it at the beginning. It's at the end. So first of all, the basic program itself, again, it's not basic in the way that we would normally think, because it's, as it says here, devised by Lama Zopa Rinpoche for Dharma students who wish to progress beyond introductory courses and are ready to commit to more in-depth study and practice. Now, if you feel that that doesn't describe you, don't worry, because this text in particular is, I think, relatively introductory. It's not kind of real deep end stuff that we're going into. So nonetheless, most of the courses subjects in this basic program are intended to be kind of for more advanced students to some degree. I hate to use that word because, again, we're all at different levels, and certainly some of us might have been around the Dharma for a long time, but we might still feel like we're still in an introductory mode. But nonetheless, I think you're all going to get something out of this course regardless. The second point on the screen is that it offers a text-based introduction to the philosophical aspects, particularly of the Tibetan Buddhist Gelugpa tradition, which of course is what His Holiness the Dalai Lama was trained in. All the Dalai Lamas are part of the lineage within Gelugpa, though they act as the spiritual head over all of Tibetan Buddhism. And text-based means that essentially we work with individual texts and generally a commentary that goes with the text that allows us to go much deeper into these various texts. So that's the idea behind this type of study. The components of the basic program, there are a number of them. The very first one is what we're doing here, the study component. There are 9 basic program core curriculum principal subjects, and then 3 optional supplementary subjects. I'm not going to go through the whole list. You can find them at fpmt.org when you go there and look under the education programs, and it will give you the full list. This course that we're taking, Mahayana Mind Training, particularly with the text of Wheel of Sharp Weapons, is one of those 9. Subject completion tests, of course, having completed each of the individual subjects, it's good to have a completion test or exam at the end of each one of them. So it kind of tests your knowledge. Some of the texts are quite longer, so you actually have maybe a couple of completion tests. But nonetheless, for this one, we're going to have a single test, and I'll go into more detail about how that will be administered closer to the end of this when we get to like late November, before the final class on December 5th. So you'll be clear about how you would actually go about fulfilling that requirement if you'd like to do that. The next bullet point is discussion, homework, and reading assignments. I might mention that for this class, we work this out where the first hour and a half each night from 6:30 until 8 o'clock, I will plan to do a lecture, and then we will have a short break, just like a couple minutes if you need to get up and stretch, and then we'll do a discussion group. For the first few, I'm going to attend and just kind of maybe be like a fly on the wall to some degree, but certainly encourage, whatever to happen so that discussion can occur. It's really quite nice to incorporate it with the class, and I hope it's useful to do it right after. That way you can review some of the main points that were taught in the evening from your own notes or from the text, what have you. There will be homework in terms of the homework questions themselves that are going to be used for discussion. You can certainly fill them out and they're in a Word file. You can put in your own answers and send them to me. I will be supplying you with the homework answers, so that you can actually look at those and see how you did. I probably won't grade them or anything. I might look through them briefly. And if there's something that's really amiss, I'll let you know. But essentially, it's just a tool to help you to be prepared for the tests that will be at the end of this, if you'd like to do that. There are also reading assignments, and I have a whole list of those that I'll go through shortly. Those kind of fill out your study, kind of give you opportunities to enhance your learning through discussing the material with other people, as well as doing your own work on your at home. There is a 3-month final review at the end of kind of having done all of these subjects. It's conducted online now. It's not something you need to go somewhere for, but just know that that's part of it as well. And they encourage people to attend that so that they can do well on the final exam. And then there is that basic program final exam, again, after you've completed everything. I'm just giving you this information so you know. Don't feel like at this point you have to commit to the full study component of all this. If you'd like to just do this one course, this shorter course, and see how it works for you, then you can get an idea of whether it's something you'd like to pursue or not. But I would encourage you to try to fulfill these requirements, at least for this one. But again, there's no obligation. Meditation and retreat component. I do try to give meditation assignments when I can. I haven't done any for tonight, prepared anything kind of in a written form, but at the end of tonight, I will mention a few things that you might meditate on. There might be some guided meditations. I don't know if we'll get around to doing that. Sometimes in some of these modules, there are practice days and maybe even short retreats. Again, we haven't talked about the possibility of doing that with this course, but nonetheless, you might find an opportunity to do that with the folks who would like to. For the entire basic program, there's the 3-month LOM-RIM retreat that is a requirement, and you can do that as actually 3 individual months or an entire 3 months in sequence in one block. But that's to give you good retreat experience. And again, that's not anything you would have to worry about right now if you're new to the basic program and just wanting to sample this course. The practice component is behaving according to the conduct and practice criteria as formulated by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and I will actually provide that for you. I'll give that to Colleen, who will send it out with the materials from tonight, the additional materials that I'll have for her and for all of you. So just know that the main thing, I'll take it off screen for a moment, the main thing about the conduct criteria is simply to abide by, as best as you can, the 5 lay precepts. And I think most of us know these and perhaps have even taken at least some of them. The first one is to not kill, to the best of our ability to not kill other creatures and what have you, but certainly not to kill any human beings. That's how you would actually kind of do that in a much more major way. The second one is to not steal, and of course to try not to steal anything that's quite significant in value. The third would be to not engage in any type of inappropriate sexual behavior that is more specifically adultery, having any consensual relationships that would be outside of a committed relationship that you are in or that the other person is in. And then, of course, the fourth one is to not lie, to make sure that we are not using our speech in a deceptive way, especially not to lie about anything in regard to our Buddhist practice, realizations, what have you. Then the fifth one is to abandon alcohol and intoxicants. Again, for doing this course, I would say the main thing is not to imbibe in any sort of thing before coming to the class or before any of the things that we have going on, so that you can have a clear head and engage in things fully. But I don't think we have to make the requirement again for you to abandon these for the entirety of this course. It just means that this is something we want to emphasize as an important part of our practice, because those substances do sometimes have an effect on our minds and the quality of our minds. So again, I know many of you have probably taken those, so there is a little handout that explains Rinpoche's wishes on that in terms of the practice component. And that's, again, kind of meant to be for the entire basic program to some degree, but as I said, mainly when we're spending time together, do these things become more of an issue. Service component, well, there are, tasks that might be involved in running the Asoshan Penling there in Missoula or the program itself. If you can offer to assist with that, that's kind of nice, and it helps the folks that are doing this work. So if we do some guided meditations, for example, if we find a time to maybe put that into the schedule, if you would, offer to lead a meditation, and that would actually fulfill the training component as well. Any training opportunities, such as helping with guided meditations, preparing discussion questions, leading small discussion groups. Again, these first few I'll be there, but we'll still need folks to kind of lead them to make sure that the group, everyone is given an opportunity to talk, and that, the group gets through some of the questions at least. We don't have to always get through all of them. Preparing course materials, I don't know, I'm going to be preparing most of those myself, but and then if we do have any practice days or leading short retreats, if you can contribute to that, that would be great. So again, these are the components of the basic program in an overall way. For an individual subject, like what we're doing here in Mahayana mind training, the first in terms of the completion would be having fulfilled attendance and participation requirements that are set by the center. We haven't really discussed these, but in general, what I like to do is to say that people should ideally, though if you have extraordinary circumstances, there would always be some lenience around that, but ideally to attend like 3/4 of the classes. There are 12 classes, so that would mean that you'd have to do at least 9 of the sessions in order to kind of be fulfilling that. And that means 9 where you're participating live like you are tonight, those who are in the Zoom room tonight. If you can't meet that 9-session requirement, again, talk to me about it or talk to Colleen there at Asoshan Penling, and I'm sure that we can find a way to accommodate that. I just do like to encourage people to be kind of live in the teachings. There's something different about what happens when we're doing it live versus just watching it on YouTube. However, again, we will be recording all of these and putting them out on YouTube so that if you do have to miss a session, there's an opportunity to catch up. And certainly that is a requirement. If you haven't attended that session live, then you definitely need to watch the video from that session. Having fulfilled the BP behavior requirement, again, I'm not going to quiz you or ask you about, what your behavior was in terms of those 5 lay vows. This is for you to know and to be feeling comfortable with. So I will leave it at that. The third is having passed the subject completion tests that, again, are set by the center. I'm going to be kind of conducting that through Colleen at the center. So again, I'll give you more instructions on that. But know that it's very fair. Again, you're going to be getting all the answers to the quiz questions, or I'm sorry, homework questions. The final test will be drawn from those. You're not going to get something that you never were asked about before. And you'll have the answers to study from, and it'll be a limited number of the questions that we have sent out through the entire 12 sessions. So it's very clear when you get to that point. I don't think it'll be a problem. Then in terms of the overall program completion requirement is, of course, to complete all of the 9 subjects, again, requirements that are set by the center or the teacher who is, again, leading that course. Participation in the 3-month final review, again, at the end of all 9 subjects and having passed the final exam, and then the completion of the 3 months of Lam Rim retreat, either, again, all together as a block or in 3 1-month segments. And that's it. So again, if you do have any questions on the basic program, just let Colleen know or myself know. If you have my email address, you can write directly to me. As I said, I would really encourage you just to try it on, unless this is like an incredibly hectic time for you and you can't imagine that you could possibly do any of this with everything you have going on in your life, then just come to the classes and enjoy being a part of that, to read what materials you can. Don't worry about it. It's not, this whole thing isn't to stress anybody out, okay? I really want people to do this course in a very relaxed way. As far as the exam, we'll probably, or the test, that's at the end of this, probably give you about a month or so to complete it. If you need more time, you can let us know. But we end this course around December 5th, so I would imagine it'd be sometime January 5th or right around then. So you've got even the holiday period where you could take some of your days and study and take the exam then. So let's go into the actual text. And you were given some handouts to do, or to kind of take a look at, to maybe print or to have to refer to. See if I can get this has been happening with Zoom. I can't find my cursor. It kind of goes somewhere. There it is. Okay, from the current slide. This is session 1. Tonight, we're going to kind of do an introduction, and I will, if I've got time, talk about the title of the text, which is the very beginning of the commentary that you have. And so in the introduction, going to be 4 main points that I want to talk about. The first is to do a sort of introduction to Lojong. I think most of you are familiar with this concept, but in order to be complete, I want to make sure that I do that and kind of go into some detail about what this body of teachings that we call Lojong is all about. Then we'll go on to talk about the twin demons that are the target of our Lojong training, these 2 states of mind that we really want to be counteracting through these teachings that we're going to be doing. And then we'll talk a little bit about the author of our text, Dharma Rakshita, and give some background for him, and then the structure of the text, okay? So the first thing to say is that this word Lojong consists of 2 words, Lo and Jong. Lo is usually mind, Jong is training or transformation. Again, we're going to talk about that more on the handout in a moment. But usually this is translated as mind training, or I think Rinpoche likes the phrase thought transformation or mind transformation, mental transformation. So let me go on to do these little bits, and then we will go to the handout, which gives a lot more information. Lojong, as this kind of body of teachings, can be understood as being mental purification through repeated practice of the thought intent on enlightenment. In other words, bodhicitta. This is Mahayana mind training. So this is an important element of it, is that everything revolves around our bodhicitta motivation. And the idea is we're going to purify and work with training and developing, transforming our mind through practicing bodhicitta and practices that are supported on bodhicitta, which is to work with whatever it is that we experience, particularly things that are challenging and difficult for us, to transform them into a path of awakening. And from my dear teacher, Geshe Japa Gyatso, who wrote the commentary we're going to be using for this, he says we need to train our mind so that it becomes one entity with these 2 things, conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. So I'm actually not going to talk about them at this moment because they're coming up on your handout, or I mean in some slides, I think, and we'll kind of go from, through them at that time. So again, Lojong is referred to in the context of it being a very specific set of teachings, but nonetheless, we can also see that it is this term mind training refers to a lot of what the Buddha kind of taught and the things that we practice in this tradition of the Gelugpa approach to the path to enlightenment. This is what this first little passage that is on your handout says. This is from a commentary to this text that was given by Geshe Thupten Chonyi, who actually is the abbot of Kopan Monastery, the current abbot, and he also was doing part-time resident teacher at Amitabha Buddhist Center in Singapore, and that's where he gave these teachings that I've taken this passage from. So the text we're going to study, he says, is related to mind training and thought transformation. These are Mahayana teachings. This means that such teachings are received and practiced with the motivation of achieving the state of full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Again, this is how we practice everything in this, in the FPMT and all the courses, is always trying to generate a motivation that is bodhicitta, or approaching bodhicitta in terms of thinking of others, wanting to be here for others. We're going to talk again at some point during the course about bodhicitta in a little more detail. But I think almost all of you have had some teachings on how to develop this mind through the 2 main techniques, and you can combine those even. Again, I will be going into that at some point, so you have some instruction on that. But then Geshe Choni goes on to say, when we are talking about mind training or lojong, there are different kinds of mind trainings. When we talk about mind training in general, mind training associated first with a person of small capacity, or sometimes called the least capacity. Mind training associated with a person of medium or middle capacity. And then mind training associated with a person of great capacity. In this context, since this is a Mahayana text, these teachings are meant for someone of great capacity, somebody who can practice these teachings for the benefit of all sentient beings. So again, I think all of you are quite familiar with the Lam Rim, but just to have, again, complete teachings on this, what was being referred to by Geshe Choni, of course, are what are called the 3 levels of the Lam Rim, the stages of the path. And we see that the very first one, the person of least capacity, means the person who at least is going to use this life to be able to assure that there's a good rebirth in the next life. Of course, this is based on the Buddha's teachings that we have rebirth through the force of karma and our delusions that will propel us into another existence, and we can actually affect that next existence. The teachings that we get in that, just very briefly, are first of all to recognize that even though we do have this perfect life that we talked about earlier, and we've met with the gurus, nonetheless, we're going to have the factor of death and impermanence playing a role. At the end of this life, we will be propelled again into another existence. That is coming, and we never know when it's going to happen. The second teaching is the teaching on the lower rebirths, these states of rebirth that will be suffering, that will be unfortunate for us. So again, considering that we are going to die and that we could potentially end up in one of these unfortunate states, we then go on to look for something that will help us to address that dilemma. And that's the last 2 topics. The last 2 topics are refuge and the teachings on karma. Refuge is, of course, turning our minds with some confidence and finding safe direction in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, having investigated these teachings. We kind of put our faith in that. And then, of course, we practice the teachings on karma primarily to have an effect on our future existence. So the teachings on karma give us very clear instruction about how to stop creating the causes for the lower rebirths and to create causes for the favorable rebirths, particularly for this human rebirth. And I won't go into all of those in detail. Just so you know, all of what I'm talking here about the Lam Rim is actually taught in one of the longer subjects in the basic program, which is on Lama Tsongkhapa's middle length Lam Rim, his teachings on the Lam Rim that are quite extensive, but really an amazing text. So if you get a chance to study at that level, that's great. But certainly many of you have already studied the Lam Rim in other ways through other texts and discovering Buddhism, what have you. The second of the 3 levels is where we look at the big picture and we understand that we are going from life to life, and it's nice to get good rebirths, but the reality is wouldn't we like to be free of that, because we've been on that cycle of existence since beginningless time. The teachings we look at there are to understand that all of samsara is what the Buddha called dukkha. It's unsatisfactory. It has certainly grosser forms of suffering, but even just being in this existence is in itself an unsatisfactory state. Having to go from life to life without ever finding any real peace or satisfaction. We also then look at the causes of that it's again our karma we're creating, but moreover, at this stage, we primarily look at the delusions, the afflictions, the states of mind that are giving rise to our karma, causing us to engage in actions that then keep us on this wheel of life, going from existence to existence. And then, of course, we understand the path that will lead to ending all of that, which is primarily at that level, the 3 higher trainings, training our minds in good morality as a foundation, developing deep concentration through that higher training, and then meditation, using the focused mind to be able to penetrate into what will undermine the causes of being in samsara. So that's, again, teachings we've all had, I'm sure, on the middle scope or the person of middling capacity. And of course, we have to train our minds in both of those. First, the teachings on death and lower rebirths and so on, especially karma at the beginning. And then we have to go on to get the bigger picture of what we're involved in. So we generate a true sense of renunciation, turning away from samsara. turning towards nirvana, towards peace. But then we get to the great scope, and the person of great capacity, of course, develops bodhicitta, develops the mind that sees that we're not in this alone. In fact, we are interconnected with all beings. And if we kind of extricate ourselves from samsara, wonderful for us, but what happens to everyone else who has been so kind to us, done so much for us in all of our various lifetimes? So here's where we develop a more universal concern for all sentient beings that is embodied in bodhicitta, which is the entryway to the Mahayana, which is essentially equivalent to the great scope. And then we engage in the six perfections, the practices of a bodhisattva, a being who has bodhicitta. And then we eventually, practice tantra and so on. All those teachings are kind of embedded or an extension of the great capacity, the person of that level. So again, this is a sort of the biggest goal that we can undertake is to actually want to become a Buddha for the sake of others and engage in the practices that lead to that. So obviously, again, from what Geshe Choni said and from what we know already in looking at these teachings on Mahayana mind training, they're firmly rooted in the great scope, the person of great capacity. So that means we're all about kind of using these teachings within the context of bodhicitta, within the context of overcoming some of the obstacles we have to developing our minds fully. So they're very powerful teachings. But again, we could consider everything that the Buddha taught at some level to be mind training. It's about changing our minds, developing some awareness of the truth of things. And mind training exists at all these various levels, but in a very general way. Mind training as these specific teachings that are embedded in bodhicitta are really kind of unique to the great scope. And in fact, they're even said to be kind of within one of the techniques for developing bodhicitta, which is equalizing and exchanging self and others. That's where we see kind of the most kind of direct or common link to these teachings in the teachings of the person of great capacity. So that's just to give you an idea of kind of how mind training in a general way is throughout the Lam Rim, but mind training here in this context is really for someone of the Mahayana disposition. Now, there's a wonderful set of books on mind training, or two books in particular that Thupten Jinpa did. One is actually a condensation, a selection of things from this large collection, Mind Training, the Great Collection, which is a translation of a huge Tibetan text that has all of these various mind training texts in it, including Wheel of Sharp Weapons. And at the very beginning, when he's introducing this is how he goes on to explain Lojong in a little more detail. The Tibetan term Lojong is composed of two syllables, Lo and Jong. Lo stands for mind, thought, or attitudes, while Jong connotes several interrelated but distinct meanings. First, Jong can refer to training, whereby one acquires a skill or masters a field of knowledge. Like we've all been in training before. You go to your first job at even like a hamburger place or something, you have to go through training, right, to know how to do things. It's kind of that's the idea in this first meaning. Jong can also connote habituation or familiarization with specific ways of being and thinking. So that kind of familiarizing, becoming more acquainted with things. Third, Jong can refer to cultivating specific mental qualities such as universal compassion, again, the Mahayana motivation, or the awakening mind itself, bodhicitta. Finally, Jong can connote cleansing or purification. And even in that quote that we had from, what was that from? Now I can't remember. Oh, from Geshe Choni, I think. Anyway, I'll go back to it and take a look. This idea of purifying your mind of the delusions of craving, desire, hatred, delusions that ignorance, greed, all these various factors that we have that we want to purify our minds of. And we do that through practicing these specific Lojong teachings. Okay, all these different meanings carry the salient idea of transformation, whereby a process of training, habituation, cultivation, and cleansing or purification induces a profound transformation, a kind of metanosis, I had to look this word up. I mean, how often do you see this word? Maybe never. It's a type of change in the mind that has the power to alter the world that we live in. It's kind of like, the experience goes beyond just our own minds to affect the world we inhabit, in a sense, and how we see that world. To go from the ordinary deluded state, as it says here, whose modus operandi is self-centeredness, to a fundamentally changed perspective of enlightened other-centeredness. So again, this is what we're talking about, is kind of different meanings of this that all draw us towards this idea of a complete transformation, to take our mind and take it from this narrow view of self-centeredness to a fully embracing view where we're cherishing all beings. This is the value of these amazing teachings. By the way, I remembered where that mental purification came from. It was from the book by Geshe Sopa's teachings. So anyway, we'll talk about that shortly. So as was said earlier, broadly speaking, all the teachings of the Buddha and their associated commentarial explanations can be characterized as mind training in all four senses described above. However, what we are concerned with here in the book that he was writing, as well as the shorter version, the Essential Mind Training book, is the emergence in Tibet of a specific genre of teaching. Again, it came within Tibet, but it didn't come from nowhere. It came from teachings from India, as we'll see shortly. In this special usage of Lojong, mind training refers to specific approaches for cultivating the altruistic awakening mind, again, bodhicitta, especially through the practice of equalizing and exchanging. Oops, sorry, I was trying to get that to go up. Self and others, as found in Shantideva's 8th century classic, A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. By the way, that's one of the texts on the basic program list as well. Takes a little longer to go through the entire text, but as you know from any exposure you've had to it, it's a beautiful text. When used in this sense, the term mind training, again, Lojong, represents an abbreviation of the fuller expression, mind training in the Mahayana Great Vehicle, or Mahayana mind training. All right. So that's the idea behind what we're engaging in here. Again, is that while we can say that what the Buddha taught in general is mind training, it's all about changing, transforming, cultivating, purifying our minds. Nonetheless, here we're talking about one that is specifically embedded within bodhicitta, embedded within our desire to achieve our greatest potential so we can help all other beings to do the same. So that's the context for this idea of Lojong. That's actually one of the discussion questions for tonight. So you'll be able to, again, use your handout to refer to as you go through this, but nonetheless, we'll get to the discussion a little bit later. Let me go back to the handout. I think it might be useful to go to the handout and then we'll go through the slides that pertain to this. So regarding what are again called the twin demons of self-cherishing and self-grasping. Now, I know this word self-cherishing, some people tend to use other alternatives, but because self-cherishing is so many places, I just thought I would leave it that way. Sometimes it's called self-preoccupation or self-centeredness. We'll go into more detail about that, but we can say all of the Lojong texts, and I would say pretty much all the ones I've encountered, counteract both of these twin demons. So this is from Glenn Mullen's introduction to a Lojong text or Lojong commentary. The book's called Training the Mind in the Great Way. It's on the 7-point mind training of Geshe Chikawa that many of you have probably read or found teachings on. All right, he says, the principal feature of the Lojong approach is that it identifies the obstacles to enlightenment as being twofold. These are the two things we're going to be working on throughout this course to try to overcome, because we see, again, they're obstacles to achieving Buddhahood for ourselves and then to be able to benefit others. He continues saying, the first is called Chezen, and it's got more words in the middle. This is an abbreviation of it, Chezen, or the self-cherishing attitude, self-centered attitude, the habit of always placing ourselves above others and of working to benefit ourselves at others' expense. Now, it says always. I'd say most of us have many moments, perhaps in our life, where we are cherishing others above ourselves, where we might be caring for a loved one who is ill, and we don't, think only about our own needs, our wanting to have a meal and to relax and go to bed and whatever. We stay dedicated to that person. So I think always is a bit strong. But nonetheless, this is the tendency that we have to think of ourselves first. He says this is the great mischief maker that brings conflict and disharmony into our world and that causes us to harm others. It is the greatest single enemy to our peace of mind. It is a bit coarser though, of course, than the other demon, but it's something that is acting in a very tangible way to cause problems for us. Again, he called it a mischief maker, and this is exactly how we're seeing it in this text. It's kind of this demon, this Mara, if you will, that's kind of, causing us problems. The second obstacle is Daxin. Again, that's also an abbreviation. Ego grasping, self grasping, sometimes called. The I holding ignorance. We'll talk about that more throughout this, especially at the end when we get into the latter part of this text that is primarily about counteracting this self-grasping. But it's a misconception that is driving the whole show. This is the root of samsara and the root of the unenlightened experience that we need to be removing initially for us to go on then to achieve Buddhahood. He says this refers to the instinctive belief in a truly existent self or inherently existent self. Again, this is the more complicated part of this text is when we get into the negation of that. And there are other basic program subjects that go into much more detail about how to negate that self. But nonetheless, that kind of is the underpinning thing that we have to eventually get rid of. The coarser demon, of course, of self-cherishing, we have to start with first. And he continues describing this as the grasping attitude of seeing something independent and truly existent within ourselves and external phenomena. Let me take it off screen for a moment. So again, we have these two demons, and we're going to talk in a little bit about the relationship between these, but they're called twins because there actually are some similarities, and oftentimes they're arising together. We have this very subtle one that is our grasping at the sense of I as being real. This is actually how Lama Zopa Rinpoche would talk about it, because how we think things are real is how we are holding that I to exist, as if there's something really here that is the I, that is the self. On the basis of that, we're frequently getting caught up in the patterns of self-cherishing. So these two kind of arise together. We grasp the I as being real, and then we hold that I to be much more important than others. Again, these are the tendencies we're trying to overcome in this text. I want to share the slides that I have on this first, and then we'll go back and continue with some of the handout. Again, these twin demons, this is actually the Tibetan for twin demons in what's called Wylie. Wylie is just a way of demarcating the particular Tibetan symbols that are used. Gongpo Ni. Ni is two, Gongpo is demon, translated here as demon. Self-cherishing, self-grasping. This is how Thupten Jinpa has in his book, Essential Mind Training. I think it's the same in the longer book, the Mind Training Great Collection. These are in his glossary. Again, Rang Chezin rather than just Chezin. Rang Chezin, Rang is usually self. Anyway, the deeply ingrained thought that cherishes the welfare of your own self and makes you oblivious to others' well-being. I mean, this is the thing, it's like it makes us kind of ignore others' well-being. Like we we get caught up in our own stuff, me, myself, and I, and what I need. And so we don't even pay attention sometimes to the needs of others. We've had times like that, and I know many of you are in helping professions where a lot of the time you are caring for others. So it's not to say, again, that we always have this mind present, because this mind is manifesting at those times, specifically when we are more focused on our own well-being. This is a little quote from Lama Zopa Rinpoche from a little talk he did called Cherishing Others, the Heart of Dharma. He says, if we analyze, if we just think, what is the characteristic of the self-cherishing thought? What is the main characteristic of that mind? The characteristic of that mind is seeking happiness only for ourselves, seeking happiness only for ourselves. That is the function of that mind. Again, a mind that we don't want to continue to cultivate, but nonetheless is very habitual. We are familiarized through countless eons of working with this as a main mindset, that it's very hard to turn our minds completely towards the welfare of others. I mean, remember, as we do this, our own welfare is not going to be neglected, because by tending to others, we actually will have our needs met because of the interconnectedness that we have with others and the karma we create when we focus on their welfare. But the characteristic of this mind, Rinpoche says, is seeking happiness only for ourselves. And then from Ling Rinpoche, he says, from self-cherishing comes the wish to further oneself even at others' expense. That's kind of the other element where we're like focused on our own happiness, but we become again oblivious to other people and often even harm them in the process of getting what we need, so that their welfare is not even a consideration. This causes all the killing, stealing, intolerance that we see around us. It is responsible for every conflict, from family problems to international wars, and for all the negative karma thus created. And again, Master Shantideva, in his text, The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, in chapter 8, he has one verse, I think this is 129 of the 8th chapter, where he says, the mind that cherishes, I mean, I gotta think it through. I just had it at the top of my head and now it's disappeared. All the suffering there is in the world arises from wanting for happiness for oneself alone. Then he goes on to say, all the happiness there is in the world arises from wanting happiness for others. That's the verse. So again, we're looking at kind of these two conflicting ideas of self-cherishing and other cherishing, cherishing others, taking care of them. What we are trying to do in these mind training teachings is to lessen the self-cherishing by supplanting it with cherishing others. And of course, supplanting it with a deep understanding of the negative consequences of cherishing ourselves. I have to say that this text is very much focused in the initial part of it for a good number of verses on the idea of all the karma that we create through the force of this self-cherishing mind and the incredible damage that it does to us and of course to others as well. And to really get that so that we stop doing these things. I mean, we have to kind of see the reality of what it is that we're involved in when the mind of self-cherishing takes over. So again, this is something we'll be getting into in much more detail. Let's go back and take a little deeper look at the second demon of these two, which is the mind of self-grasping. Again, that mind of self-grasping is called daksin. Actually, I thought there was another syllable in there, but I guess that's it, daksin. This is instinctively believing in the intrinsic existence of your own self, meaning the I that each of us walks around with an awareness of. So we think that that has some intrinsic or independent existence, as well as we have the same conception of the external world. So when we use the word self-grasping, although we might primarily be talking about the first of those, the intrinsic existence of our I, that we have this strong sense of a person that we think is real. And then, of course, it comes together with that mind that cherishes that self. So this is the main way it's manifesting, and that we're going to be talking about it through this. But know that self-grasping can be considered to be even grasping at the external world, grasping at the belongings that you have, grasping at your body, anything that is not the I. You can also be grasping that to inherently exist, because the Buddha says that this ignorance is tainting almost all of our experiences. It might not be quite manifestly present at some times, but it's always there. And again, we've had this since beginningless time. Here's a quote on that from Lama Zopa Rinpoche from the book Bodhisattva Attitude. He says, "It is because of this ignorance, the self-grasping of the person, especially again the I, your own sense of I, and self-grasping of the aggregates, which again are the mental and physical components that are the basis for the I, as well as we could include in a very general way everything else that is kind of aggregating from causes and conditions and so on. So again, it's because of this ignorance that we have been suffering in samsara from beginningless rebirths up to now. And of course, we also have been blocked from attaining enlightenment by virtue of that state of mind. So the antidotes to these two obstacles are cultivating the two types of bodhicitta, conventional and ultimate. And let me come back to this. We already touched on those and kind of got introduced to those. But let me finish off a little thing here. Well, actually, let me go ahead and do this. I'll go back to that. Kind of hard because sometimes the slides and the what's on the handout are kind of directly about the same subject, and sometimes they're kind of not quite. What do we mean by conventional bodhicitta? We all know this word bodhicitta. Conventional bodhicitta is what we normally call bodhicitta. It's the mind that aspires to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. When that mind is the support for a direct realization of emptiness, selflessness, this wisdom that is going to uproot the self-grasping, then it becomes ultimate bodhicitta. It's kind of a name we're giving to that special wisdom mind. So in a sense, we have here the two wings of the bird. We have conventional bodhicitta, which is the kind of full flourishing and development of our compassion, that compassionate method aspect. And then we have ultimate bodhicitta, which is the flourishing of the wisdom aspect. These two, wisdom and compassion, are said to be like the two wings of a bird that will take us to our destination of enlightenment. So conventional bodhicitta described here is the altruistic intention to attain enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. Again, we know this quite well, this aspiration. It's developed with two main techniques that can be combined: the sevenfold cause and effect, and then equalizing and exchanging self and others, which again is has a strong rooting in the Lojong teachings that we're looking at, and then combining them. Again, I'll give you a handout on this a little bit later. I didn't want to go through all that tonight because it's just quite a long process, but I'll be sure to touch on these at some point during this course just to review. Ultimate bodhicitta, on the other hand, is the wisdom directly realizing emptiness, again, that antidote to the self-grasping mind that is inspired by bodhicitta, by that altruistic intention. Kind of that's there in the mind of that bodhisattva. And then when they go into a direct meditation on emptiness, we call that ultimate bodhicitta, that wisdom mind that undermines all of the obscurations and removes them eventually through the path that leads to Buddhahood. Ultimate bodhicitta is developed by the bodhisattva using many analyses, among them dependent arising, the king of reasonings. Again, I won't go into all of these, but there are many analyses. I think I've done some work with all of you on some of these. When we get to that section dealing with ultimate bodhicitta in the text, I will talk a little bit more about them. So what is the relationship between these two demons? Well, let me first go to Glenn Mullen's thing, because he does talk about this, but he gives something that I think I would take issue with. I don't know Glenn Mullins. I'm not putting him down in any way. I'm just saying that based on teachings that His Holiness gave in two other books, at least, it seems like there's not this relationship. So we're at that paragraph, the first full paragraph showing on the screen, where it says the second of these two obstacles is in fact deeper than the first. So the second was, again, self-grasping. Then he says, for were it not for the eye-grasping habit, self-cherishing would not arise. Well, I've got a footnote to that I put in there. That's not his footnote. That's at the bottom of that second page, where it says that self-cherishing would not arise if the eye-grasping were not present is debatable, as can be seen in the case of those practitioners of the individual vehicle who have eliminated self-grasping, but still have a subtle form of self-cherishing. Don't worry about that at the moment. We're going to talk about it more when I go back to the slides. But essentially, we know that there is some kind of subtler form of self-cherishing that we would still say would be present in someone, even if they've gotten rid of self-grasping. So in this way, how can the self-cherishing not arise if the eye-grasping or self-grasping is gone? So again, we'll talk about that more in a moment. He continues, he says, nonetheless, both must be identified and counteracted, for both are constantly creating problems for us. The Lojong method inspires enlightenment within us by eliminating these two syndromes and by replacing them respectively with great compassion. Again, great compassion is the root of bodhicitta, so that essentially is referring to conventional bodhicitta, and the blissful wisdom of emptiness, which is ultimate bodhicitta. The Lojong approach for eliminating these two obstacles is known as the method for cultivating the two types of bodhicitta, or enlightenment mind: conventional bodhi mind of love and compassion, and the ultimate bodhi mind of the wisdom of emptiness. The techniques for cultivating these two bodhi minds, or bodhicittas, constitute the main substance of the Lojong training. Okay. So this next section, I have the full definition that was given in the glossary of mind training, the Great Collection. Gives more information, like saying, for the first one, this is one of the twin demons, da, 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 da. These two thoughts are the primary focus of combat in the mind training practice. I don't need to go through all that because I think you're quite familiar with it by now. And then, of course, for self-grasping, I might add on here at the very end, this second, third sentence is, self here means a substantial, truly existent self-identity. So when we say self-grasping, we don't just mean grasping at I and in any other way. We mean grasping at the I as intrinsically existent. So grasping a false self, grasping a sense of self that doesn't exist. Again, we'll go into that when we get to that section of this Wheel of Sharp Weapons text. The wisdom that realizes emptiness eliminates this self-grasping. So again, we have these kind of two twin demons. One is the one that we're going to be mainly focused on this in the initial part of this text, and that's what we call this self-cherishing, that causes us to be oblivious to others and to be solely focused on our own well-being, and thereby engage in all sorts of unskillful karma. And by virtue of that, we then experience various sufferings, and we're going to use like an awareness of that process to highlight the fact that we are the ones that are creating these problems, that we are the maker of this, suffering that we are experiencing. Not to beat ourselves up, but to recognize the patterns that need to change if we don't want to experience these things again. That's one of the main gists of the beginning part of this text, which goes on for about 100 verses or so. Kind of, well, not quite, but anyway, it's really quite a phenomenal section in going through a variety of things that we can experience that can be learning opportunities for us, because we need to become more aware of how that mind is causing mayhem in our own experiences. The deeper error is the reality of kind of well, now that I'm spotlighted, I need to change my camera a little bit there. It's a little bit clearer, perhaps. So the other error that we're making of self-grasping, this again is the subtler state of mind that is operating pretty much all the time, though there might again be moments where it's not so manifest, but it is the deeper error that is driving kind of our whole existence in terms of going from life to life, never having any real peace, only experiencing this unenlightened existence. So we need kind of separate antidotes to each of these. Conventional bodhicitta to help us to get out of that pattern of being focused on our own well-being, the self-centered mind. And then we need the wisdom of emptiness to undermine that grasping at this sense of identity that doesn't exist at all. So again, we'll be looking at these as we go through. So let me go into a little bit more of a discussion about the relationship between these two. As I pointed out in my little footnote to Glenn Mullen's commentary, we would take issue with the way he described it, that if it were not for the self-grasping mind, self-cherishing would not arise. Well, we're going to point out again the example that was given in the footnote. We're going to go into more detail on that and talk about it. This is using His Holiness's words from, as well as Venerable Chodron. She wrote this book with him, Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions. He says, the self-centered attitude considers ourselves the most important, whereas self-grasping, ignorance, misapprehends how the self exists. So, we do have two different states of mind here, again, with a different object. One thinking that self is most important, the other is thinking the self exists inherently, truly. Aside from the self-centered attitude's grosser manifestations, which are obviously detrimental, its subtler aspect causes one to seek liberation for ourselves alone. So again, what he's pointing to is that you have those beings who are on, again, what we call the individual vehicle. The more traditional Sanskrit, as most of you know, is Hinayana. We are in the Mahayana track, which is leading to a more universal responsibility, becoming a Buddha so we can benefit all beings. But there is the Hinayana, or fundamental vehicle track, for those beings who the Buddha is giving them a means of being free from their own suffering once and for all. They attain their own personal peace, solitary peace, and they sort of check out of samsara, but they're together with some subtle form of self-cherishing then, because they're not thinking of other beings. As I said earlier, they're kind of checking out, leaving everyone else behind when we're connected with all those beings. How can we leave them behind? Especially, as we see in one of the techniques for developing bodhicitta, the sevenfold cause and effect, all those beings have been our dear mothers. All those beings have been our dear fathers and dear siblings and grandmothers and grandfathers and very close beings to us. How can we neglect their welfare and check out of samsara ourselves? That's the bodhisattva attitude. Those who are on the fundamental vehicle path just have some subtle self-cherishing that they can't completely get rid of. They can get rid of the grosser forms that are manifesting with self-grasping, because they do get rid of self-grasping. Those who are, in order to achieve your own peace, the state of nirvana, you absolutely have to get rid of self-grasping. But you do not need to get rid of self-cherishing. The self-cherishing is still what's driving you to go to your goal, your own self-liberation. But it's, again, at a very subtle level. Got a few more slides that'll make this a little clearer, hopefully. It's a fine point, but I think it's worth bringing up because I think some of you, I've even taught this to you before when we went through one of the texts on Lojong previously, but it really does give you as kind of an idea of the variety of levels that are involved in regard to our self-cherishing as well. So His Holiness continues, in general, this self-cherishing mind, especially at this subtler level, is not an object of abandonment. It is simply an unmistaken mind that motivates, again, the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. Shravakas are usually translated as hearers, solitary realizers for Pratyeka Buddhas. These are the two paths within the fundamental vehicle, the two kind of ways you can progress to attaining your own self-liberation, nirvana. So again, just to put shorthand there, it's an unmistaken mind that motivates those on the fundamental vehicle to fulfill their spiritual aspirations, to become liberated themselves. They generate virtuous qualities and they attain liberation eventually. All admirable activities, right? We wouldn't in any way want to say that this is mischief and mayhem that's going on here by virtue of this subtle form of self-cherishing, because they are motivated to attain their own liberation and to do all the things necessary to do that. That's not a problem for them that are on this path, but for the bodhisattvas, it is. That's what we're seeing here. However, self-centeredness is an object of abandonment for those following the bodhisattva path to Buddhahood. The self-centered attitude is neither an afflictive nor a cognitive obscuration, meaning it's none of the two levels of obscurations that the bodhisattva eventually abandons. The first, the afflictive, includes self-grasping, the other demon. The cognitive obscurations are the subtler imprints in the mind that are causing things to have a false appearance and so on. Again, we'll talk about that more later. It is furthermore not a pollutant, and it is not the root of samsara. Again, so this subtle self-centeredness, or even the grosser forms to some degree, are not in and of themselves an object of abandonment. They will be for a bodhisattva, though, because a bodhisattva wants to get rid of them. They don't want them to, plague their minds, because that will cause them to fall to the fundamental vehicle and not continue their path of benefiting others. So, self-grasping, on the other hand, the second demon, is the root of samsara and an afflictive obscuration that absolutely must be eradicated to attain liberation as well as full awakening, Buddhahood. So self-grasping, yes, it's a major demon. It's the one that's at the root of all of our problems and must be gotten rid of, without a doubt. But self-cherishing, again, has different aspects to it. We do want to be getting rid of the grosser forms of it, the coarser forms of it, because we do see how self-cherishing manifests in our lives. If we For example, I mean, just a very simple example, I'm sure you've had experiences with pesky little mosquitoes over the course of this summer, where you've gone somewhere and they land on you. Maybe you were wearing enough repellent to not have them land on you. But if you have a mosquito that lands on you at that moment, you are cherishing yourself more than others generally. And you decide that you're going to perhaps, take the life of that little guy so that you don't end up with a bite and them drawing blood from you, and I guess potentially also getting some sort of virus from them that could cause disease and so on. I mean, there is that aspect. But you are at that moment making a judgment to neglect the welfare of that being and to take its life because you cherish yourself, because your own well-being is more important than the well-being of that creature. Yeah, and I'm not saying good, bad, whatever. It's just driving us to kill. It's causing us to take the lives of other beings. And that can create a karma that then can ripen into our future suffering. So we see that that's where both of those are present, where we have a self-grasping, thinking the I is real, and then we have a self-cherishing, holding it to be most important, and we neglect the welfare of those mosquitoes, and we just, swat them without any real concern for their well-being. This self-cherishing, again, that the bodhisattvas are especially after, though, to try to abandon, is the subtle one as well, because the subtle one is what keeps you on a track where you only think about your own welfare in regard to the path, where you think that I only want to achieve my liberation, and I'm going to neglect the needs of others and not become a Buddha for their sake. Now, again, why people end up on the fundamental vehicles, a variety of causes and conditions, I'm sure, as well as their own predispositions. So we're not in any way denigrating them. We're just simply saying that for the bodhisattva, this is an obstacle. For those who are on the fundamental vehicle path, it's fine. It will get them to the result. But it's still a very subtle form of saying my needs are more important than the needs of others. So I'm just kind of making this point because I think it is, as I said, kind of good to understand. We got a subtler form of self-cherishing and then this coarser form of self-cherishing that is definitely manifesting with the other demon of self-grasping. But you can have this subtle form of self-cherishing free of self-grasping, because those beings who actually attain their own liberation on the fundamental vehicle path don't have self-grasping. Again, it's an afflictive obscuration. They got rid of it. But they do still have a subtle form of self-cherishing that thinks about themselves to the neglect of others. Okay. So let's go on then to conclude this. I think there might be one or two slides from Miss Holiness yet. The self-centered attitude and self-grasping have neither a causal relationship, one does not cause the other, or even a same nature relationship. If one exists in a person's mind stream, the other doesn't necessarily exist. So this is right here in these words, contradictory to what Glenn Mullen says in his introduction. Because he said that if the self-grasping is gone, then the self-cherishing won't exist. But it says here, if this doesn't necessarily show, that if we do have self-cherishing in our minds at a very subtle level, we can still be free of self-grasping, and self-cherishing can still arise at that subtler level. So there's no causal relationship between these. Nonetheless, these guys are twins. They arise together very frequently, especially again in those coarser ways that they cause mayhem in our lives. All right. Arhats are those beings on this fundamental vehicle path that, again, have completed that. They've already gotten rid of all the afflictions, including the self-grasping, the second demon. So it says here, they've eliminated that, but they still have self-centeredness. They still have self-cherishing. Bodhisattvas, for example, who freshly enter the bodhisattva path, that is, they're not arhats who later became bodhisattvas, and are below the 8th ground. At the 8th ground, you definitely are free of self-centeredness, but at below the 8th ground, so from the time you enter the path until what's called the 8th of the 10 grounds, at that point, you do have self-grasping because you only get rid of it when you enter the 8th ground. Again, there are a lot of terms that I could probably explain better, but we'll set them aside for now. It's just essentially saying that when the bodhisattva gets to a certain level of development, they no longer have self-grasping. You can get rid of it. But they don't necessarily, they do have self-grasping prior to that. That's what the point of this is. But they don't necessarily have self-centeredness. I'm sorry. take it off screen in a moment and talk about that in more detail. The self-centered attitude and self-grasping ignorance also have different counterforces. Conventional bodhicitta is the counterforce to the former, right? Self-cherishing, and the wisdom realizing emptiness, ultimate bodhicitta, to the latter. All right, so let's talk about those really briefly, just to be clear. So what was being said here again is that you have the potential for self-grasping to be there without self-cherishing. And that's in the case of these bodhisattvas who still have some level of self-grasping because they haven't abandoned it yet on their path. They do eventually, and then they go on to abandon even subtler obscurations. But nonetheless, they might be free of self-cherishing, because self-cherishing, if you really work hard, and you can be free of this mind and no longer have it arise. It doesn't have a direct kind of antidote in terms of the wisdom realizing emptiness that counteracts self-grasping. It does have an antidote, though, through our bodhicitta. The more one strengthens one's compassion and bodhicitta, the less there is self-cherishing. So again, we do have the ability to be free of it prior to being free of the self-grasping. So that kind of shows, again, that there can't be a causal relationship between these, because you can actually be free of this without being free of that. Self-cherishing can be gone, and yet you have self-grasping. And the opposite can happen too. You can be free of self-grasping when you're one of those practitioners on the fundamental vehicle that still has self-cherishing, albeit at a very subtle level. So again, we're talking about these two states of mind generally in the much coarser way, but know that for a bodhisattva, the subtler way of looking at self-cherishing is actually one of the main things that they don't want to be adopting. Because that means they're going to neglect the welfare of all beings. It means they're going to lose kind of all of the strength of the bodhisattva path that they are committed to, because they're potentially going to fall from that. All right, don't have too much more left for tonight, and then we'll have our discussion. But I want to go back to talk a little bit about Dharmarakshita. I've got one little slide that has kind of a painting of him. He is the author of the text that we're going to be looking at. And these are some points that are actually in the introduction to this book that is on your reading list. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I'd really encourage you. I think their book is really quite nice for some of these sorts of details. It has an additional text in it that you may not read, at least initially, but nonetheless, it's quite nice. I reread the introduction today. Dharmarakshita was one of 3 gurus, along with Maitri Yogi and Dharmakirti of Suvarnadvipa, who's usually referred to in the Tibetan as Sir Lingpa, who provided special instruction in the cultivation of bodhicitta to Lama Atisha. Atisha is the one who brought the stages of the path, the Lamrim teachings, to Tibet 1,000 years ago. It was technically in 1042 saved from 1042 to 1054 when he passed away. He was born like in 982, just before the millennium, the first completion of the first millennium, entering into the second millennium in our common era. Dharmarakshita is also purported to have been Atisha's instructor in the literature of the lower vehicle, the Hinayana, at the monastery of Udantapuri. Again, he was the instructor in terms of the main teachings of the fundamental vehicle that, again, we do all practice. We just don't want to achieve the goal of the fundamental vehicle. We want to go beyond it to attain Buddhahood and abandon the subtle self-cherishing that is there for those who do want to attain the result of the Hinayana, the Arhatship. Dharmarakshita was said to be a follower of Hinayana tenets, meaning philosophically he followed lesser views on selflessness and emptiness, specifically those of the Vaibhashika system. And yet, based on the writings attributed to him and stories told about his compassion and so forth, it is likely that he was actually following the Mahayana path and not an actual Hinayanist. And it is true that you can actually be a Mahayana by behavior and yet a Hinayanist by tenets, philosophical points of view. But nonetheless, if you look at the text, and if he was the composer of the text, which is disputed to some degree, it's unlikely that he was actually a actual practitioner of the Hinayana path and having the Hinayana motivation. Wheel of Sharp Weapons, along with the other Lojong text that is attributed to Dharmarakshita, the poison-destroying peacock mind training, are among a group of works that include some of the earliest examples of the mind training genre. In fact, it's said that, again, Dharmarakshita, again, why they have some dispute on whether he's the actual author of this text is because, first of all, it doesn't make a lot of sense time-wise in terms of this seems to be something that didn't really appear until in Tibet after Lama Atisha had actually been in Tibet. But nonetheless, it is said that Atisha brought these teachings with him somehow, but there are a lot of Tibetan references in them, as you'll see when we go through the text, that make it seem like it was almost a product of Tibetan literature. Again, there are lots of other points that are raised in regard to this in the introduction. There's even a little story about Dharmarakshita and how he actually gave of his own flesh to somebody so that they could use it as medicine to be healed. It's kind of a strange story, but nonetheless said to be a very powerful being by virtue of his bodhicitta. So these are the stories that kind of make it a little conflicting. Like, was he a practitioner of the fundamental vehicle or of the Mahayana vehicle? Well, if we look at the content of the text, and if we assume he actually was the author, then there's no doubt that he was practicing the Mahayana. He wouldn't be able to speak to all of the things that are in it if he wasn't a practitioner, I don't think. So again, this text has a strange history because there are no Sanskrit versions of it. There's only the Tibetan versions of it, which also, again, makes it suspect as something that must have appeared in Tibet first. So it would seem like Dharmarakshita, as an Indian Buddhist, would not have been the author. But for the sake of what we're doing here, we'll conclude that he is. Okay, one more little section. Actually, I can go back to the slides and share and show you just this little picture. This is what Dharmarakshita was said to be somewhat like. They do some of these wood blocks, and then they often go back and paint them and kind of create images from them. These points we already raised. I might mention that, again, of the three gurus that were on that list, Sir Lingpa was actually said to be one of the most precious from Atisha's point of view because he gave him kind of the full instructions on bodhicitta, whereas from Dharmarakshita and Maitrayogi, he did gain some, but he didn't get the full corpus. Okay, the structure of the text. This is the basic structure in terms of the main parts. We're going to have an homage that we'll go to at the beginning of next week. And then conventional bodhicitta actually is covered in verses 1 through 102. The good portion of that, again, is this working with karma and the karma having ripened into various things we're experiencing and us being able to learn from that, how the self-cherishing mind gave rise to those experiences through the karma that we created. And then the last, 14, no, looks like about 14, verses are on ultimate bodhicitta, where we get the antidotes to the self-grasping. And then there's a final verse of dedicating the merits to achieving the mind of enlightenment. So in total, just under 120 verses. It's going to take us, again, I think we'll have no problem filling the time. Each class, it's good if you can get through about 8 or 9 of the verses. So we'll maybe be able to get through a few more here and there, and we'll hopefully be able to complete everything on time. I might share with you a little bit that comes from some of the books that are on your list that I'll introduce you to in just a moment, that gives us some kind of inspiration for this study. This is from Geshe Ngawang Dargye, his short commentary on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. It says, the essence of Lojong practice is to try to bring the teachings and the mind together. If there's a gap between them, the essence of the teachings is not present. So motivation is most important. That this should be our motivation to try to take these teachings that we're getting through this course that are on how to get rid of the obstacles to bodhicitta and really integrate it into our minds. Don't have that gap, where it's like the teachings are something we can look at and maybe even recite, but we don't practice them. The whole point of these texts is not just to know things so you can fill out a test at the end of it. It's rather to actually integrate them into your mind. He continues, he says, we should wish that we may apply this teaching so that we may generate bodhicitta in this life and attain enlightenment for all beings. And we should rejoice at this rare opportunity. So I think that was the last of the slides in terms of this introduction. I want to introduce you to the various texts and documents that we have, and then I don't think we'll have time to do much more. As I said, I was hoping to get to the title of the text, but it's okay that we didn't do that. Let's see, that's prayers. This is the outline that I put together. Again, all of these materials I passed on to the folks at also Shenpen Ling, and I don't know, Colleen, if you can make sure people know where they're getting those materials. I don't know if they were sent those materials when they registered. If you want to give an answer to that, you can. But yeah, this is one of them. At the top, it says provisional course outline, because again, I may not be able to cover everything, that is in one particular section, but I essentially have put together this with every Tuesday from now through December 5th, along with what are the reading assignments to kind of review the material that I went through, or to see at least the introductory comments in regard to that particular part of the text that's being covered. Tonight, we didn't really get into the text, so it's mostly introductory material. However, I think you can also read these in advance. That's where it says there verses 1 through 9. If you read everything that's for class 1, you will also then be ready for next week in terms of having read a little bit of what I'm going to be teaching on. So again, it's not that I'm going to be teaching exactly what you read. There'll be different points that I'll be making, but it'll give you a good introduction to what's coming next week. If you don't have time to read all of that, for next week, then read what you can, and then you can finish it after the teachings next week. But you'll see that I'm doing about 9 to, I don't know, 12 sometimes, I think, verses. And eventually we will conclude. I'll do the final verses, and we'll do a bit of a brief review at the very tail end. So that's kind of what I'm hoping will happen in regard to covering the text. This is the reading list. The required text is something I'll show you in a moment. It's actually, again, a commentary that my teacher in Italy, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, did on this text. It's not very long, but it's kind of a nice way to engage in the study. And that includes the root text translated from the Tibetan by Venerable Joan Nysel in the FPMT. So again, you're being provided that free of charge. This is, for you to be able to use these materials in your study. In regard to the recommended texts, and I would actually really like it if you could commit to reading at least one of these. The Wheel of Sharp Weapons, the third one, is the very kind of brief one that is kind of hard to find, though I think you can still get it out on some used sites and what have you, used books. The first one is published by Wisdom Publications, and that's the one I've quoted from already a bit, and I really like that one. If you were going to just read one, probably that would be a nice one in terms of covering things a bit more technically. However, Venerable Chodron's book, Good Karma, How to Create the Causes of Happiness and Avoid the Causes of Suffering, is really delightful because it's much more contemporary. And so again, you take your choice, but of those first two, I think Peacock and the Poison Grove is kind of nice because it's a bit more traditional, but Good Karma is excellent too. Ideally, it's good if you could read both. Again, that third one is out of print, but you may be able to find it. Other suggested texts, again, if you want some additional books to look at around mind training, the subject, these are some, two of these you already saw in your the notes that I gave you that we went through tonight, that handout. The one translated by Glenn Mullen is the first one. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's the last one. No, it's not on the list. I took it off the list. I guess I didn't. Yeah, I decided to remove that. So the one by Glenn Mullen isn't here. The first two are the ones by Thupten Jinpa. Again, the longer version of mind training text, and then the essential mind training. And again, this includes a translation of Wheel of Sharp Weapons as well. Transforming Problems into Happiness. Most of you probably read this book by Rinpoche. Very nice introduction to that aspect of Lojong. Door to Satisfaction by Rinpoche, also good. And then this wonderful book by His Holiness. It's on the 7-point mind training. This is tonight's homework that we're going to use for the discussion that will start in just a few minutes. And we'll just essentially go through these 3 questions. Every week, I will be giving these to you in a Word file. As I said, you can prepare answers if you'd like after class, before the next class, or even later on. I don't necessarily care, but you can send them on to me. And I will put my email address in the chat box so you have that if you would like to send any of the materials to me that you've prepared, answers to questions, what have you. I am giving you the answers too, though, as I said earlier. So there's this sheet that's got all of the answers in a more kind of formal way that I've put together. That was the handout. Let me see what else I have. This is the structure of the text on this outline. I'll go through that more when we start the actual text. That is another document that you have. Then there's the Wheel of Sharp Weapons in terms of just the root text. I'm not sure if I gave this one to Colleen or not, because it just has the verses. It doesn't have the commentary, and I'm not sure that I did. I don't recall. But nonetheless, it's kind of nice if you just have the verses, you can take a look at that. And then finally, the last one, the big one, is the commentary. As I said, that you're all being supplied by Geshe Gyatso, my guru and teacher in Italy when I studied at the master's program. This is what we'll be starting with next week. I would really encourage you to have a hard copy if you want to kind of take notes and follow along somewhat. I will be putting it on the screen nonetheless, so that we can kind of go through it together. But it's a very sweet little commentary that was put together, again, for when he taught this text. So this is what we're going to be doing in the discussion group now, is to go through these 3 questions. And we only went a little bit over 8 o'clock, so we have maybe about 20 some minutes, 22 minutes or so. I'd like to go till about 25 after the hour, and then come back for 5 minutes to see if there are any questions. So I'm again going to be sort of a fly on the wall. Tonight, I think, even though we have probably more people than what would be managed ideally in a discussion group, I think we'll just stay in one group. And then if maybe next week or the following weeks, you might do breakout rooms if we have more than 8 people or so, I think, because it's good to give people more of a chance. Maybe even more than 6 people, I'd say. 3 in a group works fine. 4 in a group works fine. But if you get more than that, sometimes it's a little challenging. Unless people really want to break out tonight, you could certainly do that. We've got, 11 people here tonight. What is everyone feeling? Breakout? Have you done that before, Colleen? No?
It's been a while.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just do discussion tonight then. Is there someone who would like to lead discussion, or do you want me to do it?
I think I've been designated as the discussion leader.
Good. All right, Bill. So Bill will lead the discussion. So again, I'm going to kind of turn off my screen and stuff and my microphone, and I will just be a fly on the wall just to see how things go. But because I'm here, don't be nervous. I mean, I'm not like going to be critical of anybody. I just want to see how it goes. So to make sure that we kind of get off in the right direction in regard to the discussions going forward. All right. So again, you've got about 20 minutes now to discuss, and then I'll come in at 25 after. Thanks, Bill.
All right. Yep. All right, folks. I'm going to remove Don's spotlight so that we're all in the same room. Our apologies. I think a few of the materials haven't been sent out yet, so we will get the rest of those out to you. So just FYI, if you're like wondering, oh, I don't have the outline, it's on its way. We've just gotten a few different rounds of materials from Don. So our first question this evening is to discuss the meaning of lojong and identify the specific context of its use in this text, the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. So, does anybody want to kind of open us up and start a little bit of chat about lojong, past experiences, that sort of thing? So I'll leave some space. Maybe I have to stir the pot a little more.
Lojong is
mind transformation or mind training, and we're going to be trying to use it to get rid of or counteract self-cherishing and self-grasping.
That is the textbook definition, Fran.
That is.
I'm trying to think of whether we might want to talk a little bit about experiences around mind training for some of us who have done it.
Well, when we come into situations where we find ourselves, particularly in my case, getting angry, which I have a tendency to do, I try to recognize that what's happening, why it's happening, meaning I'm not getting what I want. And then I try to apply some antidotes, which is looking at the larger picture or thinking of benefiting not myself all the time, number one.
That was great.
I don't know if it's great or not, but thank you.
Anybody else? I find this to be one of the most challenging parts of my practice. So
it's funny that you asked, because I was trying to explain to my housemate what Lojong was before this course tonight. I was like, oh, I'm doing a teaching tonight and it's on Lojong. And I have the compassion cards, from children's compassion cards. And I have one that sits, it's in my bathroom, and I try to like contemplate that one over and over and over again until it sticks with me. And I literally couldn't think of one when I was trying to explain it to my friend. I was like, they're like these little sayings that, so that's my experience. I mean, I know that they're accessible and there's all these different maxims, and I literally can't think of one.
I feel like only a few of those ever really stick with me. Like there's a few of them that I don't forget. I think
Why
that's
don't you give us an example, Billy?
Well, I was thinking I really liked I like that you said that. I mean, I think different people use them in different ways. Like you're saying, you like to get a slogan and then work with that slogan. And some people, will work with the slogan and then go to the next slogan and then go to the next slogan kind of thing. And so there's kind of different ways to look at it. I'm sure they still have something like this at the Abbey, but when I first started going to the Abbey, Venerable Chudwin was in the habit of putting slogans everywhere so that, anytime you were walking around doing anything, like turning on a light, whatever, you were seeing slogans, which I thought was cool. But I think what's challenging for me is in a retreat setting, it's a lot easier for me to focus on those things than it is in my my everyday life. Like when I get my Lojong reminder, it's not quite as good as Chudrin writing it on the wall, or whatever. It doesn't really quite stick. The main Lojong practice I do is the 8 verses, and I'd say that number 6 is the most challenging for me. And having worked with it, oh man, with several different people over a span of years, I mean, it definitely softens my attitude, but it's just so challenging. I feel like it's one of those things where it just keeps getting subtler and subtler. And so that's what I find interesting about Lojong is, there's like this coarse, gross level to it, and then you just kind of keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and noticing varying levels of self-cherishing. Nanda keeps getting kicked out, I think. Anybody else? We could go. I mean, I think we can. We've got three good questions here. So I'm kind of interested in getting on to the second one. So I guess I'm leading the discussion, but this was a sticky thing for me tonight, and I actually, put my question in the chat box. But so our next question is identifying and describing the twin demons, and then identifying and describing the Lojong approach to eliminate them. So I think we all know our first two, right? Does anybody want to answer that really quick? This was the whole teaching tonight.
You mean self-cherishing and self-grasping?
Correct.
Yes.
So that is A. Do you want to describe those two a little bit for us?
I will try. I was listening. I really appreciated a little bit more of an understanding I got about, practitioners that are maybe on the Hinayana path as opposed to the Mahayana path. And it helped me understand, some people I know, and also what I aspire to and what I really feel called to, which is the Mahayana approach. And I'll let someone else. I mean, I don't feel like, I have an idea of the difference between the two, but I'm still learning the subtlety of the difference between the two. And well, I guess from the part I was talking about, that getting a better understanding of Hinayana versus Mahayana, I would say that a practitioner can abandon a certain level of self-centeredness, self-grasping. Well, of course, they have to, because they can't reach nirvana if they're holding on to this limited I. But without the constant desire of, and they can, I see from what I've seen, can even implement like both the conventional and the ultimate bodhicitta, but at a certain level, lacking that constant intent of benefiting all beings, is the difference for me. So that's all I'm going to say right now.
I mean, I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Were you going to say something, Fran? No. Okay. I think the toughest thing for me is I can't figure out. I can't figure out whether I've misinterpreted the teachings in the past, or whether I wasn't taught correctly. But I've always thought that self-grasping was the cause of everything. And so tonight was the first time I've ever heard that you could have one of those without the other. And it's actually like made me think a little bit about certain practitioners that I didn't have a good attitude towards in the past. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe they could be further along on combating self-cherishing, even though maybe they're not further along on self-grasping. I don't know. I mean, it was just really, I'm interested to hear Don continue to expound on that. Just because, yeah, it was kind of a mind-blowing thing for me. I just always assumed that there was a causal relationship between the two, and that self-grasping was the primary cause of self-cherishing. But now I've been taught that they're actually separate. Because when he said, look at the footnote, I was like, what footnote? So has anybody else felt that way, or had that experience?
I think from the level I'm at, it's safe to assume that self-grasping is probably the cause of everything. I don't think I'm at the point where I need to worry about the subtle difference between the two.
I guess that's a good point, Fran. Might be semantics at this point for most of us.
Yeah, at this point, I'm not, it's like, it's not the main thing I gotta worry about.
I don't know why Nanda keeps getting kicked out. Having some weird internet things going on. So, anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I mean, of course, I'll never totally understand it, but I mean, I guess I could see how you could become a bodhisattva, but still not have realized emptiness, right? Those are the two,
Yeah.
things, right? So like
That part makes sense to me. I guess it's
Yeah.
the other way around. It doesn't
yeah,
make
so
sense.
can you realize emptiness? But
sorry, go ahead, Alan.
but
My bad.
not have compassion for all beings or I mean, can you realize emptiness without being a bodhisattva?
Yeah, for me, it just feels like that switch would get flipped really quickly. I mean, Robina always tells us, oh, like, you have that experience, you're blissed out, you're enjoying yourself, you get tapped on the shoulder by a Buddha who says you gotta go back and complete the rest of the path. But for me, it's just kind of interesting just because maybe it's just as a Mahayana practitioner, and because I'm just always been instructed in the Mahayana path, like I've never really had Hinayana teachings, that I just always assumed it would be like, yeah, I don't know. I would just like, I've always heard, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, hey, sorry, I was
Hey,
just gonna
Janae.
pop in. How's it going? So good to see everybody.
Good to see you too. Well, kind of hear you.
Kinda. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm feeling kind of sick today, and so
Oh,
I'm
no.
just gonna try my best here. But I have a couple of thoughts coming up. Um, and I guess so how it was really interesting, these teachings tonight. I never heard about these two demons before, so I was quite curious. And the way that I interpreted this is that the first one, which is, and correct me if I get this backwards, but the self cherishing is the first one, right? Thank you.
Yep.
That one appeared to me as to be like the habit, right? Like we have this habituated behavior to not see others. We don't have, maybe we haven't developed that equanimity aspect, all the way. And then the second demon, being this self-grasping, or is it self-cherishing? Which one
Self-grasping.
was it? Okay,
Grasping.
self-grasping. That's like that's the assumption, right, that runs the show. And until that's taken care of, right? But I also did find it interesting that these things weren't necessarily causal. And it made me think about how, on the Bodhisattva path, as practitioners that are kind of moving up, bodhisattvas that are moving up these levels, of course, there's not going to be things that are knocked out until like what the 8th level, like was mentioned, or each of these stages, and so I wonder, like, from an interconnectedness aspect, how much of this, like, we can only exist in the samsara that we are. So this karma, of course, we're going to have these things, and these habits and all of that stuff, until we reach those levels. So I'm curious about, like, yeah, where the Theravada, kind of bridges in with all of that, and to hear of the teacher who perhaps on the outside appeared to be Theravada, but realistically was Mahayana. I thought that was cool. So those are my thoughts. So yeah.
I like
Thank
those.
you.
I like those additions. I think that's very astute.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back in the Tuesday class. So thanks
Yay.
for being
This is a great group. I'm excited. I always find that like once I sit down, it's kind of like exercise, Dharma classes. It's like once I sit down, I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna be great. Leading up to it, my mind's always just like, I don't want to do anything. Laziness. So, but yeah, this is a really good group. I'm excited. Let's try and squeeze in the last question. So the last question is to please comment on the long title of the text, which is the wheel of sharp weapons that strikes the enemy's vital point.
And I might interject here that actually was the part I didn't get a chance to cover. So
Oh,
I
well.
forgot that was in there. So so I don't know that you could do that. But
Okay, because we didn't really talk about
yeah,
the two enemies. So
Right.
who are our real enemies? Well, then Don, one thing, and
Mhm.
maybe like going back to what we've been discussing here in this subtle difference. I mean, how does attachment relate to these two? Like, how does that delusion of attachment relate to self-cherishing specifically?
The
Because it seems
self-cherishing,
like
yeah.
it's a subtle form of attachment, right?
Mhm.
So it's like you could get rid of all this other stuff and still have like this little, and I guess that's where I'm getting tripped
Mm.
up. Is if I've realized emptiness, then theoretically I should have overcome my attachment, right? And I shouldn't have to. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think we can certainly see that in the coarser forms of it, that we all know quite well from our behavior when we just think about me getting what I want and not thinking about other people. That's obviously some form of attachment to our own welfare that is driving the whole show, that keeps me wanting to have what's pleasurable and wanting to avoid what is unpleasant. But at a subtler level, I think it's more akin to even what we might call self-concern. Remember, the Buddha's teachings all start on this basic level of every being driven by a desire to be happy and a desire to be free of suffering. And at some level, again, the Buddha never condemned that. He never said you being shouldn't think of that at all. That's the whole purpose of the Buddhist path, right? Is to get us to a place where we're free of suffering and where we have the happiness we seek. But it becomes, again, just a slight tinge of self-concern at that stage where it's this subtle self-cherishing. It's no longer attachment, because as you said, attachment would have been gotten rid of, that affliction that we call attachment, once you get rid of self-grasping. Because self-grasping is the root, is the problem, is what's driving the show. And when you get rid of that, you get rid of all of the other delusions, because there's no ground for them to arise. So this mind of self-cherishing that's very subtle, that again, the Hinayanas would still have, is some form of self-concern that is negligent of others, that it's not non-virtuous. It doesn't have that tone of it. It's just simply that is what is propelling them even to further, continue on their path to get, their arhatship. Well, again, at that point, they've already got arhatship when they've abandoned self-grasping, but it kind of drives them through. And then when they have arhatship, they still have that, because at that point, as an arhat, you could certainly enter the Mahayana vehicle. There's nothing stopping you, in the sense of, if you are around the Buddha, like as many of these arhats were, and you see this great example of the Buddha, and you think, oh, I want to be like him, I want to help all sentient beings, da, da, da. Well, then you can subscribe to that path right there and then. There's nothing stopping you. But for some reason, they still have this subtle sense of just some focus on their own concern. Again, whether it's based on their predisposition or what they've had access to in regard to their path and how that's developed, I couldn't say. I mean, that would probably be very unique. So to your question, again, that you had in the chat box as well, of like, how could they possibly remove self-grasping and still have this subtle self-cherishing? Because it is really at a level of just kind of a form of self-concern that simply,
It's almost like motivation.
in a sense, I think it is. I mean, it's the motivation of the Hinayanists that, as I said, drives them through their whole path, that they really want to attain their own liberation. And they aren't thinking in terms of the liberation of all beings. Now, does that mean that they don't have compassion for other beings? Well, absolutely not, because on the Hinayana path, the Theravadan tradition, they practice the four immeasurables, sometimes perhaps to greater degrees than we do on the Mahayana path. So it's not to deny that they don't have these amazing qualities of compassion and care and concern for other beings. They just don't think about being the one that's committed to doing that. And again, that might
One
be
thing,
because they've never been exposed to those teachings. I mean, it is possible in this day and age. I mean, if you're back in the time of the Buddha, maybe you were getting teachings about the Bodhisattva path to some degree, perhaps. But nowadays you could have somebody who's like born in Thailand or something, and they hear about the Thai forest monks, and they go and they practice with them. And I'm just assuming that the monks that are there are all, wanting to achieve nirvana, achieve self-liberation, and so they would never be exposed to the concept of bodhicitta and developing your mind to that degree. So
one thing that kind of lit up for me when you first started answering this was, I almost felt like the Buddha said, it's not what you want that's bad necessarily, it's that you're doing it wrong.
yeah,
It's just
you want
like
happiness and
you want
avoid
happiness,
suffering.
you don't want suffering, and unfortunately the way you're doing it is just bringing you all those things continuously.
Right.
It's not necessarily wrong to not want yourself to suffer. It's not wrong to want yourself to be happy.
And I think that's what His Holiness was saying in that passage, is that we can't
Yeah.
say that mind of that Hinayanist, that fundamental vehicle practitioner, is something to be abandoned for them. I mean, it's a virtuous mind. It leads them to actually attain nirvana. It's just for the bodhisattva at that subtler level, it's a level of self-concern they don't want to entertain because they want to be concerned about others. Yeah. I wanted to say a few things. I mean, I really appreciated kind of that people joined in and discussed. And thank you, Amata and Ali and Fran and
Nice to meet you, Amata.
and Danae and Bill, of course, for leading it. So I think it went really well, but I may still keep tuning in for a couple, and we'll see how it goes. But for the month of October, I'm actually going to be not at the first Tuesday in October, but all of the remaining Tuesdays, I'm going to be at my mom's, where it's 2 hours ahead. And so probably when it's to go to 10:30 at night versus 10, I might just, bow out at 10 so that I can, get a little more rest. But we'll see. One thing is to really encourage you to do this sort of discussion, and that's because we don't have anything like debate incorporated into this program as they do in the monasteries. And it's said traditionally that people learn about 25% of their knowledge comes from the teacher giving instruction like I did tonight. The other 25% comes from self-study. 50% comes from debate in the traditional monastic studies. That's kind of, I don't know how they get these statistics. They're just basically saying that a good chunk of your understanding comes from interacting with others. And we have discussion instead of debate. And so I really encourage you to do that. And it was nice the way people did participate tonight, to articulate what your understanding is based on what you heard. Sometimes you don't know where your misunderstandings are until you do that. And I'm hoping everyone can guide everyone else skillfully in kind of seeing that. If you do hear something that someone says that is in contradiction to something you heard in it, then just say, well, I really appreciate what that person said, but I just want to say what I heard, and maybe we can discuss and see, what the real understanding is. Try to do it very gentle and, take care of each other. I meant to have a little short break before the discussion, but, kind of got in this flow and kept going. If you do need to take a break, well, certainly you can stand up, shut your camera off if you don't want people to see you, stand up and stretch or whatever, and keep listening to the rest of the class. But yeah, we'll try to do at least a little couple minute stretch and give people an opportunity to have some break. The slogans from the 7-point mind training, are a wonderful training technique. And if you can work with those, certainly. this text is modeled a bit differently than that. Those slogans are really quite rich, and the 8 verses are rich. I put that in the chat box. I don't know if everyone got a chance to get that. Maybe we'll send that out with materials tomorrow or whenever Colleen is going to do that. It is good to have reminders about practicing these things. I remember one of the people in the master's program had posted something on like all of his walls and at his door that said, cherish others. I mean, very simple thing. Maybe you need something more specific, but he was really trying to combat his self-cherishing through some reminder to do that. And reminders do help us until we have more pervasive mindfulness and can remember to hold others dear in all of our activities. But so those are the things that I heard that I maybe just wanted to comment on briefly, but we should probably close. But if there was anything else anyone needed to ask at this time before we conclude.
I had a comment that
Yes, Martha.
you might find interesting based on this discussion. So I interact with a practitioner who could describe more as a Hinayana, and extraordinarily accomplished. Like I can't even fathom the levels and the wisdom, and he is compassionate. And I am very unpracticed. Like I don't have he has like 50 years of training. And we were in a discussion recently, and I was talking about my lack of wisdom and but the fact that I can't help but care for, like, I don't want to just do this for myself, but for my family. Like I must bring them along, and for all beings, and the animals, and whatever. And compared to him, I am just completely incompetent in many, many levels. But he actually looked at me with like a great intensity and sincerity and said, like, I wish I had that. And I really would think that he is getting close to our hot ship. And it was so shocking to me that it's like there was something in him that wanted that. He's so accomplished, and he admired that in me, even though I don't have the rest of it. And so I don't understand I guess how you could, that's just interesting to me. And you could be at that level and actually say, like, I kind of wish for that. That's all I wanted to comment and maybe ask.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Amata. Yeah, and I have heard this from some people that the assumption that when you get emptiness or this interconnectedness, a dependent relation, that we are involved in this web of interrelatedness with all of life and all beings, you would think that that would be natural, like you would just fall into the space of having this immense compassion for all beings, that you already model, I know, in your behavior, Amata, and many other people do as best as they can. But I don't think it necessarily comes with the territory, again, because these two can be quite independent. Somebody may have developed their compassion to some degree, but the wisdom itself can be developed a bit separate and apart from that. And I don't think there's necessarily a kind of penny that drops on the other side of the realization of emptiness. It makes you instantly feel that connection to all beings. You get the inner relationship, but you don't necessarily get the sense of responsibility. I think that's the big difference. Do you feel responsible for the welfare of all beings? So I think it's an interesting point. Until we've had that direct realization of emptiness ourselves, perhaps we won't know what it feels like on the other side and the sense of compassion that we will have for all beings. But maybe if we've already been developing that through the path, through our bodhicitta motivation, then it'll fall quite naturally into that.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a great story and very motivating.
All right. So again, you've got a week between classes to do some reading if you can, do some meditating on this. I would really encourage you as a mindfulness practice just to be aware of what's coming up for you and to try to identify when self-cherishing is coming. And if you have some idea of what self-grasping looks like, maybe see are they coming up together or is it somewhat separate? I just am curious if people are developing some mindfulness around this as we go through this course. Because again, this course isn't just to develop the intellectual knowledge of what's said in these verses and da-da-da-da. It's to actually change our minds, to become more aware of how self-cherishing takes over and to see at those times, can we counteract it with a mind that thinks of others at that time and so on. And if you want to even meditate on cherishing others through these techniques of developing more compassion and love for them, I would encourage you to do that as well. So yeah, maybe I'll try to get around it. Just got back from my travel yesterday. I didn't have time to kind of put together a little sheet with some recommended practices. Maybe I'll even try to do that before I send things to Colleen tomorrow. But based on prior courses, there'll be a link that will be sent out. Colleen has said that yes, she'll put all the videos on a single YouTube page. You'll have a link to that where you can go and watch the videos. And then we'll also have, again, the slides from tonight and some of the other additional materials that you can have access to coming out to you. So let's do our final prayers together. So I have to get over to the prayers. Okay. Let's go to first the prayer of dedicating all this merit for enlightenment for all beings. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then the prayers for His Holiness and for Rinpoche's swift return. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And then we can dedicate for any beings that we're holding in our hearts specifically at this time, who are experiencing difficulties, suffering, whether we know them or not. Their suffering moves us, and so it's good to take advantage of that and to send this energy out to them so they can be free from their suffering and find all the causes for perfect happiness. And may this also occur for all sentient beings by virtue of what we've done here together tonight. So I didn't put my thing into the chat box. I'll do it right now. It's really easy. Don Handrick at yahoo.com. But make sure you spell Handrick with an A and not an E, or it's going to go to somebody else. Okay, Don Handrick at yahoo.com. All right, everyone, take care. Thank you so much for joining tonight and staying a little later. I'm going to do much better, I hope, to get everyone out at 8:30. And of course, when it's just discussion group, you might have to get yourselves out at 8:30 if you need to. But everyone be well. I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
You're
Don.
welcome.
Thank you for
Thank
doing this
you.
teaching for us.
Sure. Thanks, Bill and Colleen, for all your support. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Colleen, for everything. She's kicking butt on all of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
Well, I missed that.